Hi, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Unpacking Organizations, where we discuss our passion topics. I'm here with Shradha. Hey, Shradha, how are you doing?
Hi, Rupert. I'm doing great.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.
Today we have Jules, and that's why I'm so excited to welcome Jules Siegel-Hawley on our podcast today, on our episode. Jules, thank you for joining us today and accepting our invite. We are so excited to have you and learn from your awesome experience. So for our listeners, Jules is a clinical social worker. She's educated in clinical social work from Columbia. That's my alma mater too. So we share that in
It's a
common,
mafia
Jules.
here. I feel outnumbered. All these people from Colombia. What's going on?
We'll talk about that in a minute. But then she actually moved into organizational transformation, and she's a very passionate transformation practitioner, and that's where our paths crossed. So, Jules, without further ado, I would hand the mic to you to talk a little bit about yourself. Tell us who you are, what's your background, how did you get excited about this whole world of org design, job architecture, and what do you do today in your current job?
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks for having me. Again, my name is Jules Siegel-Hawley. I have a background in clinical social work. It was pretty clear when I graduated, pretty soon after, that I was more interested in how large systems impact the individual. So how the macro impacts the micro. And I sort of stumbled into this organization design, transformation, change world. I got my start at a dream organization for me, which is Doctors Without Borders. I worked with them internationally for many years, rolling out various people initiatives. I spent the last several years back in the US supporting various healthcare systems implement big change, big transformation. I recently launched a company called Andes, where we focus primarily on 3 areas of practice: organization design, people strategy, and change leadership. So anything within those 3 domains, we've got you covered. And I am just really excited. It's been a really exciting year, bringing kind of a fresh, human-centered perspective to this dynamic organizational design space.
Very cool. Very cool. So, as you started, what was one of your few initial projects or work that really got you excited about this role or this work? Because I understand that it's very coveted work. Not everybody gets to have the exposure to it. So, how did you get to how did you get the exposure?
I can tell you, nobody wanted the job. Nobody applied for it. And I was like, this is so fascinating, guys. And I think it's the clinical social worker me. I was thinking to myself, we're talking about, it was a role that was meant to implement a standard job architecture across the world in our various hospitals and clinics. And what that means is you're talking about altering somebody's title, their level, their salary. And if there's any hot button topic, universally for all human beings, it's going to be title. It's like status, money, and so I was fascinated. I was fascinated by that conversation, and so I stumbled into this role, and I actually discovered that I was obsessed with the work, and that it really let me tap into the clinical social work piece, while again looking at this broader organizational system and how those 2 things interact.
And what drove that? So what was the need? What was the problem you were solving?
Yeah, we work in about, I'm going to get this wrong, but I want to say we work in about 53 countries worldwide. And How I used to frame it up to people is you would have a nurse in one country and you would have a nurse in another country, and they would be called different things and they would be at different levels. And so we didn't have a common language that we could speak to do our workforce planning, I mean, really just engage on big picture strategy. We were all saying different things. And when we thought of what a nurse does, we were all thinking about different things. So the idea was to create this common language and a common logic that we would follow all together. MSF has a super dynamic structure. It's made up of multiple entities. You have 5 operation centers, you have multiple partner sections, people coming from all over the world. You have locally hired staff, you have our international mobile staff. And so it was crucial, actually, for the organization to thrive that we defined this common language and really created a common framework to operate inside of. It was a necessity.
And Jules, just stepping back a little bit for our listeners, because they might not know
Yeah.
actually. So what does Doctors Without Borders do, and how does it operate? And just give maybe some examples.
Yeah, they operate in the places where healthcare is needed the most. They do everything from emergency response to long-term HIV care. They've been operating since the 1970s. I would say, at the moment they're on the ground in Gaza, they're on the ground in Ukraine. Really, it runs the gamut, but the idea is to provide quality care to the people who need it most.
And often these are hotspots, so your ability to forecast demand by definition is going to be very difficult.
That's
And so you
correct.
need to scale up, and then, in long tails, it's very hard to predict how this
Correct.
is going to change over time. It could be a tsunami, I guess, or an
Correct.
earthquake somewhere, and you've got to jump in.
That's correct, and that was actually my first real experience with their job architecture was in Nepal following the earthquake in 2015. All 5 operational sections landed to respond to this, and what this common job architecture allowed us to do was, as sections pulled out, as projects closed, we were able to mobilize staff between the operations, between the projects. So again, we were all speaking a common language.
It means you can move
And
people around more
correct.
easily because you know what they do, and
Agility.
it
Yes.
gives you
Right.
agility. So, which is my assumption when a lot of people would listen to this, you say, well, you're bringing all this structure. Surely that's creating bureaucracy, but actually, what you're doing is the structure is giving you flexibility to be agile.
Correct. And that's one of my favorite conversations because people for sure think, oh, we're introducing all of this red tape, but it was the exact opposite. And I would say that the job architecture that we built, which what we're talking about really is we're talking about like a grid, a role grid. Rupert knows this. A role grid with core roles and core role profiles with core accountabilities. And so, again, we know that a nurse is on a level 5 with XYZ accountabilities. And so we're all speaking this common language. And it serves as a foundation and a launch pad, I would say, for so much more when it comes to organizational innovation and maturity.
Could you give an example of where you've brought innovation on the back of this?
I would say, I mean, the first thing that I want to talk about is compensation, but that doesn't feel super innovative. So I'm gonna talk more about the performance management piece because now we're able to measure against the same criteria for all of our staff and invite people to partake in a career path that they didn't have before. We are desperately trying to attract but really retain our staff in the humanitarian sector in general. That's always a hurdle. And so by giving people clear line of sight to where they can go and what they need to do to get there, what that will look like when they get there, that has a tremendous amount of innovative potential.
Yeah. And Jules, as you're thinking about it, it makes sense that we have work as the common currency to think about as we are designing the job architecture. Where does skill and attributes and the knowledge that starts to play into it? Because I feel that there is a big overlap, but many a times organizations over-index on one part than other, right? They're like, okay, we just are going to look at skills only, or not looking at skills and looking at work only. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, because I've seen both sides of that coin. I think that if you go straight to the skills, you're missing a crucial step. And I will say to get to the skills, um, it kind of requires more maturity than some of the organizations that I've seen. They're oftentimes so relieved to have this common framework, this common language, common logic. They're using it to benchmark for their salaries, create like really comprehensive compensation programs, coherent contracting structures, things like this. The next step for them is usually to get into the core competencies and the core skills, defining the target versus the actual and designing their performance management around that. That for me, I've always seen it as the next step, almost the like next base camp on this Everest climb. And then I've also seen organizations that, again, skip over the job architecture piece and go straight to the skills. And I think that that is a huge missed opportunity because what you glean from this role grid job architecture work is so fundamental to the organizational identity and overall success.
That's fantastic. I think it feels the way you have set it up in such a nice, succinct way that should be no-brainer that every organization should have like a robust job architecture. And it's not something that we have to just write it in the stone and then police it, but it has to be fluid enough that as business changes, we can change with it. So that, I think the three of us collectively align on it. But then my thought around is that why do organizations shy away from it and do not do it? Like, what happens? What are the resistance that you encountered as you were doing this work? Or maybe not. So maybe we can take some experience from your organizations and see how we can make it better elsewhere.
Yeah, no, I think my honest opinion is that the market is cornered by some really big players, and they tend to make the process very expensive to do. And they sort of they make it seem super technical, and it is. It's definitely technical work. Like I'm not going to diminish that at all. But interestingly, so at Doctors Without Borders, we used a very reputable vendor who has really given us a comprehensive package. When I was working back in the US, we were merging six very different health tech companies together, trying to align them on one job architecture. We actually ended up building our own job architecture in-house. And that was a really different and exciting experience. And it actually kind of spurred me to think about Andes and like, oh, this is something that we can take elsewhere because the market doesn't have it. And honestly, people are desperately needing this and they don't feel like they can afford it, that they have the time for it, or that they have the skills in-house. So does that answer your question? Like I've seen it. It's really about the
Jules,
market
it's quite
is.
interesting.
Yeah.
I share. I think people can try and perfection's the enemy of the good sometimes, and you can introduce too many levels. And I, you know, I personally believe you just go back to the simplicity of like an Elliott Jack and the requisite organization, and you've got max 7 levels. Then you got specialist roles that are technical, and then you got those that are more generic. But and and then you got your families, which from your core functions, your
Yeah.
core role families.
Yep.
That gives you the foundation for a grid.
Yep.
And that's a great starting point. And then from there you can build so much. And I think sometimes people can overcomplicate it, particularly when they start moving
Right.
into confusing a role grid with pay bands. And
Correct.
pay bands are really about also demands in the market. So
Yep.
certain roles have a higher demand and a higher pay band because of market forces.
Yep.
That's a different angle, and you can use the data to get to that, but that's not the place to start.
Yep.
And then the other thing is you have sort of think horizontally, you have certain competencies that are very generic to a level.
Yep.
And then you have others that are very, think vertically, that are role family skills. And I think behaviors and knowledge is more the horizontal. So, thinking in a grid and just thinking like that becomes more useful. And then, the last reflection is just, and I'd be interested to see what you had, is people over-indexing on trying to have too many skills and competencies associated for each one and just boiling the ocean.
100%. Boiling
Yeah.
the ocean. There is also, and this goes back to the fundamental universal truth of people being obsessed with status and money and title, because it was always like, let's have an SVP1 and an SVP2, and let's have a VP, getting really into creating these really slight variations and things, which way overcomplicates it. It makes it unsustainable. And so you're totally right, as always. Like we need to keep it simple. And you're right that the competencies, it needs to be simple. Keep it simple, because the work itself is going to be complex.
There's enough complexity there. And I think the other thing is there's a role title, which is the level on, and then you can still have a different position title.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you can have your position title, which is, the example, you can be an HR business partner, or you can be, a senior HR business partner is the role title. And then you could be HR business partner for North America or for finance, or, and then you have a position. And if you want to play with different position titles for certain reasons, then sort of knock yourself out. What you put on your business card and what you are can be two different things.
Yep.
Because we don't really care as much. So it's breaking those bits apart, I think, will help people.
I was just going to say that the act of co-creating the job architecture with the teams was incredibly empowering for everybody and really sped up adoption. It was clear that, and then what we were able to do was actually publish the role grid in our internal SharePoint. So it was a very clear, transparent process that everyone felt like they took part in. And it was really quite beautiful. It was different from coming in and having the thing kind of handed to you, and then I have to go and implement it. It was like, no, let's actually co-create this as one organization, these 6 companies coming together as one. That process was really kind of an inspiring one for me.
Jules, I think you've already answered what I was going through, is that you do not have like a traditional job architecture master's, right? Which is not available anywhere, right? Like I do not have an org design master's from anywhere. It's a skill that you acquire as you work in the organization. And so what were some of the key learning moments or methods or channels through which you upskilled yourself into this amazing world? Like how, and I can say it for myself. Yeah, how did you learn? Because I can say for myself that I stumbled upon a big, massive org restructuring project in my early career that gave me the exposure and the experience. But many times there are a lot of our listeners who want to work in this kind of topic, but don't get that either learning skills or experience. And once they get the experience, they don't know where to go. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because you have self-taught yourself with your passion and with your experience. So how can we learn to be more like you?
I would say that I'm definitely self-taught, but like very much through practice. And so I
Mm.
came in with a very mature grid, like that's what was handed to me. And the idea was we need to implement this across all of our country contexts, which obviously are very very different. So here's a common vision and a common frame that needs to be implemented across many disparate places. And I think that it was, I would say it took me, this is going to sound like no time at all, but it took me like 6 months to really understand a couple of things. One, that the common vision that they were pitching to people wasn't resonating. And so it was like, guys, they in the field don't care if we're talking about enhanced reporting mechanisms. They don't care about efficiency in the way that we at headquarters are talking about this. We need to figure out a vision that's actually going to resonate with them and make them say, oh, this is worth us making this major change. And so that was the first time where I really started to get inside of the vision casting of it, and that helped me. That really helped me get people's attention. So we changed the conversation to be more about compensation equity, to be more about career paths, career mobility. That was like clearly where we needed to go. Like people's eyes would light up and they would say, how do we do that? And then the next thing that I realized, and this was my clinical social work stuff coming back, was like, you just have to be honest about everything and make sure that you give a really clear narrative and a really clear logic that all hangs together. And so I really started to learn about the logic that was behind the job architecture and started to put together very clear talking points to get people to understand how this hangs together, how this grid is different from their current grid, how things differ. So going from a level 7 on your current grid to a level 5 on this grid is just because we're measuring different things, right? So it really became an exercise in like very simple education about how this would work, what the process would be, and what their role would be in the process. So it was through this practice that I really got to understand the two pieces of it, which is how do you cast this vision about why this is important and why this should matter to them, and then being able to also explain the more technical backbone of the thing to make them understand this isn't just pie in the sky. Like, we're going to actually implement a sacred structure that's going to allow us to pay people equitably and give you a path forward in your career, which is exciting for everybody.
I mean, just want a quick reflection on it is that you started thinking about change before it even started. And that is something that we should all keep it on our mind, that sometimes we think about change after the architecture is fully designed and how we are implementing it. That's when we bring in the change mindset. But you were bringing that change mindset up front, thinking about how do we do vision alignment? How do we think about what our people want and co-creating it with your business partners, which makes it so powerful and actually helped you learn as well. So thank you for sharing that. Very powerful. Sorry, Rupert, you were saying something.
No, it's good. It's a great summary. It's a great summary. Thanks, Shradha. So I'm just conscious of time.
Yeah.
So Jules, if you had to think of one tool, one specific tool, and one trap to help people not fall into the trap, what would they be?
I have like 3 tools that I'm thinking about, but I'm going to go with the most basic thing you can possibly think of. So your people managers are a huge untapped resource in this process. People will usually think about the highest level getting their buy-in, and then the employees themselves. Your people managers are the ones that really have to carry this forward. And if they don't understand it and aren't bought into it, they're gonna go, this isn't on me, guys. Talk to headquarters, right? And so what we introduced very basic, was a custom FAQ. So we had a basic FAQ document that I put together based on like, these are the general questions that we're going to get about this. But depending on which context, which project we were implementing in, we would customize that based on the questions that were coming in and sort of anticipating knowing what was about to be implemented in their unique circumstance. But this essentially provided our people managers with a script of like, this is the question and here's your response. And that was so simple, but it ended up being the fundamental tool that really uh, made this a successful implementation.
And did
I've
you
since,
do
sorry.
practice with them? Did you do dress rehearsals with some of them to get them comfortable?
We
And
did do some role plays with them
yeah,
for sure. We did do some role plays with them. I think having clear and concrete answers to their questions was already a big step forward. I would say that as I've evolved in my knowledge and understanding of this work, I've actually taken that and translated the FAQ into more of a conversation guide. So it gets a little bit softer and it gets more into this like role play. Here's what they might say. Here's how you should respond. That's I think. I have here FAQ/conversation guide because it started as an FAQ and then I've since translated that into
I,
what I
I
call
actually
a conversation
I
guide.
like the positioning of a conversation guide
Yeah.
more than an FAQ, because an
Totally.
FAQ feels like it's an IT program or
Right.
Yep.
something, whereas conversation, you're going to have
Manual.
conversations and there's an impact. And how
Yep.
can you have that? And how can you, yes, answer the questions,
Yep.
but it's about getting people comfortable and just
Yep.
building a level of understanding.
Yep.
So that's really nice.
Because a lot of this implementation is going to be about tough conversations or crucial conversations,
Yeah.
and that already is a barrier for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So, and managers really kind of shy away from these
Yeah.
conversations because again, there's such a hot button for people, and so being able to really anticipate what they'll likely kind of be
And did
up
you get into
against.
some of the tough, like, okay, so you're demoting me because my job
Right.
title looks different,
Right.
Yeah.
this kind of
All of that.
emotional stuff, because
Right.
that's really, so you're really coaching them. I mean,
Yes.
call it FAQs, but actually you're coaching them to have tough conversations and
Yep.
help people through
Yep.
that journey.
Yep, that's correct. That's correct. And that actually really ties into the trap that I think of, which is not being prepared enough with your implementation. So you need to have a super meticulous project management strategy. They need to know exactly what's happening and when. I need to be able to like look into each phase and know these are the crucial outputs and outcomes that need to happen in order for it to be safe for us to move into the next phase. There needs to be a good governance structure in place with the right stakeholders at the table to meet at each core milestone to really continue to shepherd this thing forward and feel a sense of buy-in. And then lastly, there needs to be a comprehensive social, legal, and risk assessment to be done for each context so that we can identify where are the hot spots, where are we like okay, and tailor your conversation guide and other supporting implementation materials accordingly. Without that, if you just go with this kind of change story, no, it needs to be super meticulous. I think of it like you're rolling out a software actually, like get that serious about it because these conversations and this kind of rollout has really serious implications for the organization.
So in terms of the length of the conversation guide, so just give me a sense, how many questions, how many, like, what's the scale of it? Say, I'm a people manager.
Sure.
Is it 5 questions? Is it 20 questions? Is it, what's the length of this? Like, how much information do I need to absorb, just
Yeah,
practically?
I keep them between 2 to 3 pages always. I can actually give you, I don't know if this is helpful, but like the inspiration that I had for this conversation guide idea is the serious illness conversation guide is an incredible tool that came out from Harvard and Ariadne Labs about 8 years ago, I want to say. And it really provided this incredible template for how to have crucial conversations in the hospital for patients at the end of life. And I took that idea and I was like, okay, Great. We have another crucial conversation. How can we tailor this? Because everyone talked about this conversation guide, and I remember getting it in my hands for the first time. It was 2 pages, and it was super simple, but like really well done. And so that I can tell you was the model for all of my subsequent conversation guides.
I love that. So you're
Love
actually
that.
literally taking, I mean, the most difficult conversation that anyone's ever going to have, which, if you're an oncologist or you're dealing with a lot of these messages,
Correct.
you're doing it every day, all day.
Yep.
And actually taking it from that clinical setting where you need to help people process, okay, it's a different order of magnitude of complexity and impact.
Definitely.
So if you can do it in that setting, which is an end of life conversation,
Yep.
then, yes, you might have an impact on your pay, or you might have an impact on your
Right.
job title. And but still you're dealing with emotion at the end of the day, and
Yep.
Yeah.
it's real emotion.
Yep.
Jules, this has been
I
amazing.
love that.
Thank you.
I love talking about this stuff, guys. Anytime.
Thank you, Jules. I learned so much from your experience and from your big, beautiful brain. So thank you for sharing that, and so much practical knowledge in what you do in your day-to-day life. So more power to you, and keep pushing the boundaries of these topics.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Until next
Until
time.
next time.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.